This is stupid. Oh, hey. So I've been reading Sally Schultz's book Political Solidarity, and on page 132, she writes the following line in her piece on the relationship between oppressed groups and solidarity groups. The third reason not to use identity prescription/ascription as the whole basis of solidarity is that these identities are often the basis of oppression, and oppression itself may make solidarity an impossibility. She's talking about the problematic conflation of oppressed identities with inherent solidarity here, and I think it's a pretty interesting thread to pick at. Now, the other arguments that she makes against this seem pretty reasonable to me. I mean, it is pretty problematic the way that certain organizations have used their notion of shared oppression to essentially ignore other competing factors. And I'd love to talk about the natural pathway to trans-exclusionary radical feminism following that ideology, but instead, I want to talk about the third reason she brings up. Now, on one hand, I can see the point that Scholz is trying to make here, that some people, for one reason or another, may not understand their identities as political and do not take solidary political action because they don't see themselves as political actors or as someone who is affected by oppression. It reminds me of the famous poem structure First They Came, where the narrator does not act in political solidarity with certain groups they consider themselves unaffiliated with, and is ultimately left alone when the oppressors finally turn to them. It's a good point, but something about the way Scholz talks about it feels off, like we're not looking at the full picture here. Scholz boldly states that oppression itself may make solidarity an impossibility. I think that very much depends on how we are defining solidarity then, a term which Scholz seems to define in the loosest sense of the word. And for the record, I understand why Scholz does not try to nail the concept of solidarity down to a simple definition. It is simply too complex of a word to prescribe it with such strict, rigid meaning. Yet this use of the word impossibility seems to imply that there is a way to eradicate any chance of any kind of solidarity, and I'm not quite so sure I'm on Scholz's side about that. Sure, there are plenty of methods oppressors can take to try and dissuade political solidarity, but I don't think there has ever been a time or setting throughout all of history where it couldn't be argued a certain amount of solidarity existed. People have always been able to care for one another and fight for each other in the worst of times. It's one of my favorite things about people. The examples Scholz uses to define her point are really illuminating to, for example, a person who may be unaware of the myriad oppressive identity prescriptions that affect him or her. Scholz describes this person as essentially incapable of understanding their own oppression, practically laments that if they only had the capacity to notice, then they would fight for what they deserve, and I just can't relate to this portrayal. Sure, I've met plenty of people who seem blissfully unaware of the way that they are personally impacted by their race, gender, sexuality, etc., but I have never once thought of them as an untreatable victim of psychological oppression. To be clear, I agree that this mentality is an effect of oppression, but I do not agree that this oppression is simply impossible to get around. In a way, we give far too much allowance to the oppressors by giving them this immense, impossible power, and it seems extremely unproductive to me to believe that a person can be so entrenched in oppression that there is simply no way out. It gives this hypothetical person absolutely zero autonomy in the situation, no chance to see things straight for themselves. The way they live their hypothetical life is dictated solely by the oppression they exist under but do not see, and there is no way to break that cycle. It's just a bit of a depressing way to view things, in my opinion. Secondarily, in this piece, she touches on external oppressive factors that might hinder a person's path toward political solidarity, and that some people, quote, may, on the basis of prescriptive identity, be denied some rights that are crucial to challenging and changing their oppressive situation. And again, I can't help but feel like this is giving too much leeway to the oppressor. It almost feels like we're giving them the very power we warn against by labeling it as an impossibility to see through. Yes, we can discuss the various ways oppressors attempt to take our power away from us, but again, I must ask why we are discussing it under this light. It might seem like I'm taking this a bit far, but to me, the word impossibility is so finalizing that I wouldn't use it in a professional book about the philosophies of political solidarity unless I actually believed something was an impossibility. And if this is Scholz's idea of an impossibility, well, I disagree. I think Scholz's use of the word impossibility here casts the entire rest of her point in a malicious and unsettling shadow. Am I really meant to believe that some people are just permanently trapped in the webs crafted for them by their oppressive conditions? Because I don't believe that. It's deterministic and pessimistic, and it makes me wonder what the point of political solidarity is if some people are just predisposed to ignorance. To be fair, the rest of the chapter is pretty chill. I liked it. But this one line kind of stuck with me, and I just wanted to talk about why. So,